First time anyone in the grand hall heard Thomas Reed sing, the sound stopped the clockwork of the evening as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. It was the kind of silence that follows a dropped glass and a sudden truth, brittle, astonished, impossibly full. For a moment the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. For a moment Victoria Hale, streaked in stage light, crown of cameras, her smile practiced to perfection, felt something inside her shift the way ice slides on a lake. Victoria had built herself on control. From the first time she stepped onto a stage in a church basement at 10 years old and watched the congregation tilt toward her like a ship toward its mast, she had learned that the world could be shaped with a voice. She learned to sharpen it into weapon and ornament, to use vibrato like currency and silence like leverage. She had a voice that filled arenas and albums that sold in countries she had no plans to visit. She had a production team that could engineer any stage into her private orbit. She also had a voice coach in her back pocket, a manager who negotiated storms on her behalf, and a public image stamped with perfection. Thomas Reed had nobody polishing him. At 52, he pushed a mop through the backstage corridors, collected empty water bottles and discarded costume jewelry, and kept his eyes low when the famous moved through the halls. He was short for his age, not by muscle but by a life folded in on itself. A string of jobs, a house paid off on paper but lurching on the edges of upkeep, and a daughter whose letters came every few months like the small, stubborn light he kept in the drawer of his heart. Music had never left him. It lived under his ribs like a rumor. He used to sing in church choirs, then in small bars when he was young and reckless. He had even auditioned for a conservatory once, but a layoff, a mortgage, a sudden illness in the family had pushed that door shut. Life's practicalities are often the kind that change your name from maybe to must. The gala that night was for a music education charity, glossy, performative, sincere in parts, distant in others. Victoria was the headliner, the night's glitter pinned on her like a medal. Cameras dotted the room, their eyes hungry for arcs of drama and moments that would stitch into headlines. Thomas had been hired through staffing, maintenance, the contract read, to make sure nothing sticky remained on the marble floors after the champagne flowed. He had his uniform, his slow hands, and a keychain with a single photograph of a young woman with his eyes. Rebecca, his daughter, the reason he paid bills on time and learned to listen again. It began with a joke. After Victoria finished her set, the MC, looking to keep the night lively and the audience awake, announced a surprise segment. It would be a duet with a very special guest. The cameras circled like gulls. Victoria swept forward, smiling with the freshness of someone who had rehearsed the grin in a mirror, and the MC, fishing for spontaneity, asked if anyone in the staff might like to come on stage for a fun little number. A table of producers laughed. A few interns clapped politely. Thomas, who had been emptying trash near the stage entrance, froze, then kept mopping. He had learned to be invisible. But someone in the crowd, a fatigued intern with too many drinks in his hand and a phone that wanted content, shouted Thomas's name. "Hey, janitor, come on up, man, sing for us." Laughter. The room pulsed with the casual cruelty of the moment, the rich and famous entertaining themselves by inviting the ordinary to perform for amusement. Victoria, who had been taught that any note that did not sing her story was a note wasted, laughed along. Daniel Cross, her manager, gave her a look that said, "Play it light." Victoria leaned into the mic and said, "Bring him up. Let's see what he's got." Thomas walked onto the stage with the slow courage of a man who had practiced not being seen. The lights were hotter than anything on the stage he'd known before. He felt like a boy at a crossroad. Part of him wanted to run. Part of him wanted to honor the way his father taught him to stand. He took the offered microphone with hands that trembled only slightly. The crowd waited for the joke, for a croaky murmur or a humble little hum that would confirm the pattern. The world entertained itself. The janitor entertained it briefly. Then the world returned to its stage. He opened his mouth to a song that was not on the evening sheet. It came out of him like water, pure, clear, not showy but precise, a voice shaped by years of choir hymn and late-night practice with a cheap cassette player and a hope that never burned out. He chose an old hymn he had sung in church, not because it was a safe choice, but because there was truth in it, a humility that matched the shoes on his feet. The first verse moved polite hands, but the second verse changed the room, and the third note, the one he held with a steadiness that had nothing to do with the glare of cameras, filled the rafters in a way the sound engineers could not craft. Victoria's smile cracked. She felt something loosen in her chest, not rage, not shame, but a complicated ache like missing someone who had never left. She had been the voice for others for so long that hearing an unadorned voice, unamplified, unproduced, rooted felt like seeing a photograph from a life she hadn't lived. Thomas's high notes pressed at her, daring and clean in places she had stopped trusting her own ability. She saw in him not a prop, but the echo of possibility she had once believed in until fame had taught her to be careful. The crowd rose in a stunned applause when he finished. Cameras flashed, and within minutes multiple phone screens were replaying the clip. Janitor sings, leaves everyone speechless. The headline waited in people's mouths like lightning. Someone shouted, "Encore!" as if encore were a birthright of performers only. Victoria stepped forward and on instinct sang the back line, a supporting chord, a harmony she had practiced since childhood. The sound of their voices together was odd and beautiful, like two colors mixing that shouldn't but did. It made the room tilt forward, made Daniel cross-check his phone and realize what had just happened, a viral moment. What followed was a collision of consequences that neither Thomas nor Victoria had asked for. The clip went up on social media and shredded the quiet of Thomas's life and the rehearsed stillness of Victoria. Overnight, Thomas became a sensation in the eyes of a world always hungry for Cinderella stories. Offers came like rain, television appearances, invitations to record producers, managers with two bright smiles. He was thrust into auditions he had not prepared for, into interviews where microphones asked for his grief and his gratitude in equal measure. He found cameras in his local supermarket. He found his daughter's phone number in his pocket and did not know whether to call or to let the moment be what it was. Victoria faced a different storm. Some fans adored how human she appeared sharing the stage with a local worker. Others accused her of mockery, of staging an exploitative stunt. Critics parsed her expression in slow motion and decided with a cruelty that loved a good story that she had intended the humiliation. Her manager wanted a press release. Her publicist wanted distance. Victoria felt the old skill of performance morph into something else, into a defense that was inadequate against feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with cameras. The first challenge came in the form of history. Thomas's sudden visibility reopened old choices. The conservatory that had once rejected him wrote a gentle email asking whether he would like to audition for a scholarship. A small label offered a demo session. The problem was that Thomas's life was not a sterile stage. He could not simply step into a new career without handling the small, sullen responsibilities he had built to survive. He had a mortgage and a daughter who needed reliable care. Rebecca lived 3 towns away and worked nights, and he had been her steady, whatever that meant, for years. Leaving or changing his life too suddenly would risk the fragile balance he had fought to keep. The second challenge was Victoria's pride. She had trained to trust her voice in the way sailors trust a compass. Suddenly confronted with a voice that hummed with a different truth, she faced a private fear. Had her talent been always more about the machinery around it than the thing itself? Her vocal cords had been through years of strain and spectacle. There were notes she could conjure no longer. That knowledge fractured something that had sustained her, the quiet arrogance of guaranteed applause. There was a third, more dangerous challenge: expectation. The world wanted a tidy narrative. The janitor becomes a star, climbs a staircase of red carpets, and the singer learns humility and becomes a better person. Life, as it does, refused to fit the headline. Thomas wanted to sing, yes, but he also wanted something quieter, a life where he was not always explaining himself. He wanted the chance to teach Rebecca that it's possible to keep music in your hands and your family in your heart without the two canceling each other out. Victoria, more than anything, wanted to reconcile the part of her that could command a crowd and the part that had been a shy girl in the church, when applause had felt like a hand on her shoulder rather than a crown. They both made mistakes. Victoria made the first public misstep when she released a lukewarm statement about a spontaneous moment, a phrase that read like an apology without admission. The backlash was ugly. It dug at an old wound of hers that still ached for control. She tried to arrange a meeting with Thomas, offering an olive branch in the form of a privately arranged studio session and an offer to mentor him. Daniel Cross leaned in, whispering about optics and the benefits of association. Thomas, who had already had a taste of flash and found it thin, hesitated. He did not want to be used as a prop. He had been humiliated once on a stage where the world laughed at a poor man for being human. He remembered the lurch in his chest when cameras had waited for him to fail. He would not relive that. So he declined the first offer. Public's appetite for drama intensified. People wanted the redemption arc. They wanted Victoria to surrender her pedestal and for Thomas to accept transformation as if it were a trophy. Neither of them fit neatly into the mold. Thomas accepted small interviews, but his words were careful. He spoke of music as a comfort, of the joy of singing for its own sake. He refused to be hurried into a career plan written by strangers. He wanted lessons, yes, but not a magazine's version of fame. He wanted to teach children in his old neighborhood for free, to stand at podiums and tell stories not of himself, but of music's power as a daily balm. Victoria began to listen. Started awkwardly. She invited Thomas to a charity rehearsal space under the pretense of repairing some equipment he had fixed backstage months ago. He arrived wary, expecting another performance. Instead, she opened the door and let him in. They sat in a room of folding chairs and empty music stands, the kind of place where voices are born and reformed. Victoria apologized, not with press release language but with a small, human speech that made the room smell like old paper and honesty. "I made a bad choice," she said. "I thought I could make something funny. I didn't think about how it would feel to be the joke." Thomas studied her like someone reading a note in the margins of a book. He had no need to be vindictive. He had learned survival through patience and the steady practice of gratitude. "You had a choice," he said. "We all do. I don't want a trophy. I want to sing, yes, but I also want my life to be mine." They started meeting, not to create a new publicity cycle, but because something honest had sparked between them, a mutual hunger to be more than the images they'd been given. Victoria taught him stagecraft, how to step into a space and hold the air so it listened, and he taught her humility in the form of practice. Thomas had technical knowledge she had never needed, breath placement learned in a chapel's hymn, a way of smoothing a phrase into the corners of a room until it felt like weather. Victoria realized that there are notes in music and notes in life, and the two are not always the same. The challenges did not evaporate. A tabloid claimed that Thomas had been hired to sabotage Victoria's performance, and for a breathless day the internet spun conspiracy theories. Rebecca, watching the headlines, felt afraid. She worried about her father's head being turned by bright lights and empty promises. The strain pulled at him. He found himself packing in the middle of the night, reading offers that smelled of contract and hunger. He posted an honest video, simple, direct, about his love for music and his need for balance. Rebecca watched it and saw, on the screen, the father who had taught her to whistle at the bus stop, to sing lullabies while making tea. She called him and said, "Do what makes you happy, but do it in a way we can still eat." He laughed and cried at the same time. Victoria faced a more intimate battle. As rehearsals continued, she tried a high passage that years of strain had made brittle. Her voice cracked on the rehearsal track, and the sound was a private humiliation that no camera would catch. She cried in the sound booth, and for the first time the armor around her heart felt like it could be dented. Thomas, who had never once judged her for the price of fame, walked in and handed her a cup of tea like someone offering a small island of ordinary. "Your voice has been through storms," he said. Maybe it's time to change the songs you sing so they fit the person you are now. That suggestion opened a new path. Victoria began to rearrange her identity. She stopped chasing the exact notes she couldn't hit and instead explored the way a line could be read with intimacy rather than volume. It was not surrender but evolution. Her fans adjusted, some with reluctance, others with devotion. Her critics found less to feast upon. The tabloids found a slower story and moved on. Thomas, meanwhile, navigated offers with a clear rule he gave himself. He would accept only what allowed him to be present for Rebecca and to keep time for the children he wanted to teach. He signed with a small, independent label that gave him control of his material, and he set up a community program that brought free voice lessons to the kids in his old neighborhood. He did sing on television a few times, but he insisted on keeping the focus on community music, on the idea that talent without roots can be uprooted by whims. In the end, the resolution was not a neat, fairy tale crown but a quiet rearrangement of priorities. Victoria did not stop performing. She stopped letting her identity be defined only by sold-out arenas. She recorded an album of songs that were softer, with arrangements that felt like conversation rather than proclamation. Critics called it vulnerable, fans called it beautiful. She volunteered to help Thomas's community program, not as a savior but as a teacher who could organize, fundraise, and sing low harmonies, while the kids learned to find their own. Thomas's life shifted too. He recorded an album with the independent label that reflected a lifetime of music, hymns and small, tender songs about work, love, and the rooms between. When asked why he chose such humble material, he said, "Because that's what's true for me." He and Rebecca grew closer. He learned to read a schedule of studio time that left weekends free. Their relationship, once dotted with long silences, grew into a companionship built from shared dinners and rehearsed laughter. The night they opened the community music school, the chapel that housed it smelled of lemon polish and possibility. Children who had never seen a microphone stood with tiny instruments, and the air buzzed with new, uneven notes. Victoria sang a duet with Thomas in the living room of the building they had refurbished. It was not on camera. There were no million-view metrics to mark the moment. But the faces in the room, worn, hopeful, surprised, were more generous than any stadium crowd had been. After the last chord faded, a little boy with two big shoes walked up to Thomas and said, "I want to sing like you." Thomas smiled, and for a long moment the world felt exactly as it should. The story that began with mockery ended not with grand triumph, but with a simple rebalancing. A reminder that talent can exist where we least expect it, and that the currency of a voice is not only power but kindness. Both Thomas and Victoria discovered that the most difficult notes are not the ones you hit on stage, but the ones you accept in your life. Victoria learned that vulnerability can sound like a new song. Thomas learned that recognition does not have to uproot the life you've tenderly grown. They did not become moral parables. They remained complicated people who stumbled, apologized, and sometimes failed. Yet the change they made was true. They widened the circle. Thomas taught, sang, and fed the corners of his neighborhood with music. Victoria softened her spotlight until it warmed rather than blinded. Rebecca watched her father and saw the man who had always been there. And in the quiet mornings they shared coffee and records and the sound of old hymns playing in the background. She heard him laugh in a way she had not heard since she was a child. The final lesson was simple and stubborn. Talent is not merely to be displayed. It is to be shared, nurtured, and steered towards something that outlasts applause. The world will always crave spectacle. What it rarely remembers is the work that keeps music alive. In the years that followed, Thomas's voice was heard at weddings and in little recitals at the community center, his high note as clean as a lighthouse beam. Victoria's songs changed the shape of her career, but deepened her connection to the music she loved. And on certain evenings, when the stars were just bright enough to make promises, the two would sit in a small room and sing for no one but themselves, discovering, always, new ways of being brave.